there's a Miro add-on. That's pretty cool. I'm sure you can tell we don't use Meet that often. We use Discord.
Yeah, I think most of them also use Discord. Or they should at some point.
See, there's just a few more missing. Give it another minute or so.
Earlier, when you said attendance, I thought you said tennis.
Ah, yes, tennis.
And then I thought about the Wimbledon final and that attendance. Quite a lot of high profile people go and watch tennis.
Yeah, it seems to be a thing.
And then they take their kids, and you can see that they're bored out of their minds.
Yeah. So you have to be quiet the whole time, and you just hear these like grunts as the ball gets hit.
Yeah. Do they have like lapel mics or something? For some reason,
yeah.
Yeah. That was terrible. Good tennis, but yeah, I don't quite get it. It's just Pong, really, isn't it?
I think Pong was probably after tennis. So
fair enough. But we've moved on.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Are you alive, Andrew?
It feels like nah. If I'm anything, I'm a dedicated student. But please, everyone, learn from me. Drink water. Drink a lot of water. For those who didn't know, this weekend I had to pass a kidney stone, and I had to pass a kidney stone this weekend, and it is as painful as the legends say.
They make very nice engagement rings.
What?
It looks like a little grain of black sugar.
Yeah, but you could polish it. You could
It's literally crystallized urine.
Yeah, well,
do you want that on your ring?
It's very special, if you give it to someone. It's like a little piece of you, No, I heard that people do that.
It's apparently my reason was I wasn't drinking enough water. But yeah, very much pain, but very much alive at least.
Yeah, at least that's good to hear. All right, I think we can get started. Okie dokie. Just gonna dock that there. Okay, cool. So today we are talking about world building and environmental design, going a little bit more theoretical and airy-fairy than last week's discussion on just what are the technologies and how can we use them and all that. So this is going to be a bit of we're going to do an exercise at the end of the class to kind of mash up what what you want to be doing in your field in particular, and how can you bring in all the concepts that we're going to be chatting about today into your own work, but with application in creating 360 immersive experiences, and specifically in VR as well. Steph and I were chatting about possibly doing a week 4 or so practical session on campus, so you guys can get a chance to test out the devices, experience VR, and yeah, we'll try and find some cool experiences for you guys to try. Can anyone tell me anything about world building or environmental design? Any ideas about what that might entail? What does world building mean to you? You can just shout out or just type in the chat, either way. Let's keep this discussion open.
World building is both the narrative and the environmental concept and generation for a playable environment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm way too chatty for someone who's in so much pain, but you're through world building, without even needing to tell your audience something, the world itself should already like give information about the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like how the place is presented already gives you like a hint of the narrative.
Yeah, okay, so that's working into the environmental design aspects of that, and yeah, environmental storytelling. But yes, world building then is it's more about, it's not like constructing the world physically, but more how does the world come to actually exist in the first place? So it involves constructing an imaginary world deeply tied with a fictional universe. So the worlds in narratives aren't merely settings, they are key characters imbuing narratives with deeper meaning and influencing the audience's journey. Environmental design, on the other hand, focuses on the arrangement, the appearance, and the functionality of those spaces within these worlds. So reinforcing narrative and guiding the audience's experience. So they work hand in hand, especially in the sort of 3D settings or the visual settings that we work with. So consider the immersive experiences provided by the worlds of Hogwarts in Harry Potter, or the galaxy in Star Wars, or the town of Hawkins in Stranger Things. So it's the magic, the intergalactic politics, and the suspense, and they're all enhanced by their respective words. If you have to say Harry Potter or Star Wars or Stranger Things, each of those holds a very different thought and feeling and mood and emotion in your mind if you've watched those. Harry Potter's like magic and wonder and, you know, cool things, and Star Wars is like futuristic sort of sci-fi, space, huge possibilities, and a menacing force at play. And Stranger Things is just like this dark, intense, otherworldly experience. And it's so many different aspects create this world, this image that you form in your head. And that's what we're looking at, is the world building. What are the elements of creating those visions that people see when you say those words? So therefore, effective world building engages audiences and enhances immersion, making each element of the world an integral part of the experience, the overall experience.
As fun as world building can be in the moment, you are literally playing God when you do. And seeing as you actually aren't, unless I'm missing something, there are a lot of pitfalls that you can fall into. And it starts with the mindset that a lot of world builders don't put themselves into. I need you to pay complete attention and at least try to internalize the words that are about to come out of my mouth. Every aspect of our reality, as you see it, is subject to change in a fantasy world that you created. Sounds obvious, right? But it's not just things like climate, down to fashion, religion, common sayings, days of the week. We can take things many steps further. Days don't have to be a concept in your world. Gender roles could be non-existent. Crustaceans could be the dominant species. The world could actually be flat. It's a great series, check it out. There is no standard for fantasy or sci-fi, not Tolkien, not D&D, not The Expanse, or whatever else you're thinking of in your mind right now. Allow me to introduce the magical cube of problems. We just tackled one side, and this next side is where you curb what I just said. hard. Yes, we have a sandbox where we can literally do anything, but that definitely does not mean you have to do everything. There are usually two reactions to the every aspect of our reality is subject to change bit. One is that scene from Inside Out where all the little sprites in your brain are running around and everything's on fire, and the other is, oh, I can build everything, and then trying to build every single aspect of your world. The latter is what we in the biz like to call world builder's disease, and it is as common as it is deadly. Trust me. I see this a lot in world builders. I actually struggle with it a bit myself, where they'll completely ignore the fact that there is an entire story that works in tandem with their world. Whether you're crafting a D&D campaign or writing the next Star Wars. Hey, if you're world building to world build, knock yourself out. But if your story is heavy on the political intrigue, then an emphasis on borders and rulers is a natural step towards that. Might want to focus more on magic if your protagonist has to learn it at some point. Your Silmarillion doesn't need to be nearly as extensive if you don't plan to publicize it like Tolkien did. And as is the nature of a problem cube, once you solve one side, another side rears its ugly head. You might have already noticed the issue. So right now, this is your story, and this is the world you've built around it. All this blank space are things you could have built but didn't. And that is simultaneously the best case scenario and the worst thing that you can do. You didn't waste time on things that won't show up, but then there is this flimsy line between what's built and what isn't. If the reader stands here and looks at your world at large, which they will because they're smart, it starts to fall apart very quickly. This is where Ernest Hemingway comes in. His iceberg theory loosely states,
now you listen here, you little you, as the writer, are supposed to know all this. You're gonna get in your shitty little writer submarine and you're gonna see the entire iceberg. Now your readers, they're dumb as and they only see the top of the iceberg because their little brains can only stay on the surface. But because your brain is shockingly not as smooth, you know the entire iceberg, and you can frame it in such a way that their thick little heads think they can see the entire thing. It's hilarious.
Thanks, Ernie.
Thank you.
What a lovely man. He's also right, by the way. But the thing is, we already established that it's not ideal to build every detail in your world. We can't know the entire iceberg. So what's the answer? Fake it. We remove the start line and get a gradient instead. The amount of world building you do fades with the vision of the reader. The mountain gets foggier the further we go. They'll get to a point where they can't even see the mountain anymore, but they'll know it's still there. But it isn't there. All there is blank space, all the work you didn't suffer doing. Diagrams and metaphors are fantastic, but how do you actually apply this? Well, let's go back to our story that's heavy on the political intrigue, or in other words, Game of Thrones. The borders, maps, and people in power need to be clearly defined because those are the main pieces that are interacting in the story. We need to understand pretty much everything about them for the interactions to make sense. Alright, what's the next natural progression? So how do those powerful people get in power? History, another part of our world we need to flesh out detail. It's going to dictate how those political parties interact. Oh, culture is going to be a big part of that as well. Ironborn and people of the North are not going to interact the same. Throw cultures on the list, and the ball keeps rolling and rolling, but notice how we don't talk about religion or the lower class. Even though those elements do come into play later, they're not nearly as significant. You hear the old gods, the Lord of Light, the Drowned God, you see the religious call in King's Landing, and judging from how extensively the rest of Westeros has been built, you assume there's just as much depth to the religion as well. You see the mountain inside the fog, and there is more depth, but Martin doesn't have to build the religions of all 30-something deities in his world. He probably did for fun though. His lore book is actually what House of the Dragons is based off of. Also, Martin has an incredibly huge world, so most things are probably going to be built. But something like the Gentleman Bastards is an excellent example of the other end of the spectrum. If you're a superfan though, you probably know all those 30-something deities, but you don't need that to understand the story of Game of Thrones. And would you look at that? We're halfway there. More than halfway there. What? You see, this side of the cube was forgetting to make everything cohesive. All these aspects of your world are not independent of each other. They need to interact to create a believable world. It's so funny when I see stories like, oh, this is medieval England, but everyone has magic. If everyone had magic, it would not look like medieval England. People would use it in their everyday lives for transport, for work. There would probably be a caste system around it. It would dictate culture. You can't just dump something into your world and say it doesn't affect anything else. planets. Think about it like orbiting planets. The bigger the change is from real life, the more gravity it will have on everything else. We've already mentioned magic, so let's go there. It's another significant aspect of Game of Thrones world building. How does it relate to the political intrigue? Well, dragons are a part of the magic, and they are essentially nukes. If you have one, you are all powerful, which is why the Targaryens were able to stay in power for so long. You see how it also gravitates towards history? This power makes the Targaryens akin to gods among the common folk, thus dictating an aspect of culture. This can play very well with the next part of the cube once you solve it, which is ignoring the rule of cool or focusing too much on realism. I imagine most world builders don't have a problem with this one, but they ignore one crucial aspect of it. This is a bit similar to the first side of the cube, but whereas that one was more focused on showing you how far you can take world building, this one is different because you probably already have one or two really cool ideas you want to execute. This is speculative fiction. Execute your crazy, insane ideas. Your readers and audience want to be transported to another world. Here's the secret. That's probably why they like the genre so much. They will suspend their disbelief and give you leeway to do it. Now, why I said this can pair really well with cohesiveness is that, yeah, do the cool thing you want to do, but don't ignore how it interacts with the rest of the world you've built. For example, in the fantasy world that I'm currently working on for my novel, I just wanted to make the most coolest outlandish creatures that I could come up with. But then I hadn't surrounded this concept with a world where these creatures would naturally evolve to be these things, which could create a disconnect in the reader's mind. So I was like, how do I solve this? Why don't I just make natural evolution not a factor? Unnatural evolution. Magic leaks in from another dimension and warps the world in whatever way it sees fit. Nobody's arguing the science of evolution with me if I give them that as my reason. But now there's this problem of magic leaking in from elsewhere. Wait, that's not a problem. Hell yeah, what else does magic change? The landscape? The people? What if I'm writing sci-fi and I can't just magic things into my world? An alien race brings in a crazy virus that only morphs animals. I still get my cool outlandish creatures. When you constrain yourself to not just what you want, but how it will affect other things, you start to come up with really interesting ways for them to interact. You create chemical reactions that take you places you never expected to go, and your world is usually better for it. Now, you might have already noticed that you can't just solve 5 sides of a problem cube. You've already used the pieces on the other sides, and the only pieces that are left solve the last side. And that is what happens when you fix all of these problems. It becomes nearly impossible for you to create a stagnant world, which is another thing I see in countless of worlds. The 90s were not the same as the 2000s, and both of them were completely removed from the 60s. Things will look different a decade from now, and that's all within one lifespan. The world is constantly evolving. Yeah, dragons are nukes and the Targaryens have been in power for centuries, but then the Baratheons took over, then the Lannisters. It doesn't always have to be wars and coup d'etats. Technology can change your world, cultural evolution, the environment. And it's okay if your story doesn't focus on this, but having it happen in the background can make your world feel so much more realistic. But there is one final part of the cube, and that is the cube as a whole. I am milking this metaphor for everything it's got, huh? What this is right here is trust. And I have to be real, if you're watching this, chances are you don't have it. Sanderson can create a world where the readers have to climb a 100-meter brick wall and their fingernails to understand the world, and they will. At least I know I will, because I also know there's going to be an amazing story on the other side of that wall. Yeah, everything I talked about is going to help you create a better world, and Sanderson does all that too, but he can ignore things like not world building as deep or creating touchstones to our reality. He has a lot of leeway because of who he is. He can scramble the cube a little bit and still present it to his readers as a complete world and story, and they'll accept it. Same goes for King and Martin and any other famous author. They have already established that trust, their rapport with their readers for years and years. So just keep in mind that emulating everything they do might not always be the best thing for you. That being said, there is something they do that everyone should, and you can find that out in this video right here. Side note, I know this isn't actually how you solve a cube. Pro cubers, do not come at me. Okay, bye.
I love that guy's personality. It's great. Yeah, so that was a bit interesting. Just kind of highlighting that there are aspects of the world that you need to consider and bring to the forefront for your viewers to actually believe that the world that you're trying to present to them. But it's not everything. You don't have to try and convince them of every single aspect of the world, because that will that'll just be a crazy bit of work. Stefan, you've distracted me. What's up?
Sorry. just scramble your ideas there. No, I just wanted to add like the why factor. Like, why is world building important for immersive content? And I think for me, the obvious answer is that there's now something missing from the experience that you had before or with traditional entertainment medium, and that's character. So typically with immersive content, you are the origin of the perspective. So you don't have character necessarily. I mean, you could somewhat introduce it like games do with, like gauntlets or arms or something in the foreground. But normally there's nothing. So it's almost entirely dependent on the world. I think all of the theming information needs to come from that. You don't have the luxury of saying, oh, well, let's do a character sketch or have the character explain.
As fun as world building can be in the
Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, so I think that's why world building is so important for immersive content. That's just my 5 cents.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there. You don't have characters driving the story, and you are, you're in this world, experiencing the world, and the world has to speak to you through different ways. So it's either by having events take place around you, or just the world in its construction can tell you a story. Which we're going to get to. So at its core, world building is the process of constructing an imaginary world or an entire universe, which sounds very daunting. But this involves everything from crafting unique geographical features, ecosystems, and species to the culture, the history, and the societal norms of the made-up inhabitants that live there. So the goal of world building is to create a setting so rich and immersive that it becomes an active participant in your narrative, capable of eliciting emotions and creating connections with your audience. And you can do that in a number of different ways, like even just changing out the lighting and adding in different audio will already create a different mood, a different vibe, and suggest a different nature of the world around you. So think of the complex universe of The Legend of Zelda. Every kingdom, every forest, every dungeon in Hyrule has its own unique culture, history, and challenges, pulling the players in and making them part of this world, shaping their experiences and emotional responses. Now, that game is an open world, and or at least like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild are open world. And that means that there's not a whole lot that the game is doing to ensure that you're getting the same experience as everyone else, the designed experience. And there's a couple interesting talks on how the world builders and the level designers have constructed this world that always introduces some kind of intrigue. And that could be by the geographic construction of the world. So making sure that there's always something just over the horizon or just behind a mountain, and that you've got areas of openness and areas of or clusters of detail as well, separating areas so that it makes it easier to navigate around the world. But let's not dive into level design too much now. When it comes to world building, consistency is key, and your world needs to have its own set of rules. And once these are established, they need to be followed. So if magic exists, it should have its own laws. And if your world is different species or races, they should each have their own unique characteristics as well. And any shift or change in these rules needs to be accounted for in your narrative and to maintain believability as well. So with VR and immersive content, because it captures so much of your senses, right? It takes up with a VR headset at least, it's taking up your whole periphery, your whole peripheral vision. And that already means that you're not just looking at a segment of a screen, but you're fully engrossed in that world. Then you have the audio, right? And that's then complementing the visual. So now you're hearing things coming from all different angles. And then you've got your controllers. And with games, at least, the controllers can provide a lot of feedback as well. So now you've got touch feeling. And there are full body suits as well in development that can allow, that can simulate vibrations of different kinds all over your body. So you can feel like being hit with a bullet or punched in the chest. So just if you keep adding those sensors on and on, it makes it like you don't even have to suspend disbelief anymore because you're kind of experiencing it for real. And so VR already has that going for it, where you don't have to, you're not just watching a screen and listening to audio from a single direction. You're one step closer to experiencing it, like sort of really in a real sense. Yeah, so play to those benefits. Is you've got your visuals, you've got your audio, and you've got your feeling as well, touch. Yeah, so creating engaging worlds or believable worlds becomes a lot easier. But it doesn't have to be realistic as well. They can be stylized in a number of ways, and I'll show you some examples just now.
This week, I wanted to delve into design and start a series on world building. The concept is one I briefly thought up with a friend not too long ago. The setting is the post-Civil War South. Our main character, a Confederate soldier who manages to survive the war, returns home disheveled and exhausted. He begins to notice peculiar occurrences that are happening throughout the town, and suffers from these intermittent hallucinations of Lovecraftian organisms covering the previously pristine antebellum buildings. These faceless organisms are alien in nature. Their structures are organic and mucousy, and they pulsate. So with this backstory in mind, I now begin to design a set in a top-down three-quarter view. As mentioned before, the set is the interior of a 19th century home, so I'm looking at a lot of historical reference when figuring out what props to include in my interior design. Since the home is being overwhelmed by this large organic structure, I draw all of my props at various angles to look as though they're strewn about. I'm trying to emphasize damage and disorder, so the floorboards are cracked, the windows are shattered, and the stairs are collapsed. I'm avoiding putting in too much lighting information because we're going to try lighting the set in several different ways. So for now, I'm just trying to include the placement of the props and some textures. Something to keep in mind that I don't think I did very well in this example is to try to indicate the paths that a player can take if this were to become a video game. The design itself should indicate where a player can and cannot go and what props can be interacted with. I use a heavier line weight when one prop is in front of another, or if it's of key importance. Lighter line weights are reserved for my initial perspective blockout and some textures. It's a good idea to err on the side of lighter line weight, and then punch out some of the details later with a thicker line. Then to separate out the silhouette of the room, I add in some values on a layer underneath. And finally add in the silhouette of a character. Beginning with a floor plan really makes my design decisions a lot easier. And possibly the most important part of design is iteration. I've only done 2 for the sake of this video, but I think that doing this process over and over again will yield better and better results. So once again, I'm keeping in mind the narrative, and I'm also trying to make the home feel as though it's lived in. This means putting yourself in the position of the person who occupies this home, as well as doing a little research into the time period to figure out what sorts of things would be included. Dining tables, chairs, cast iron stoves, these are all sorts of things that should be included in the set. And now once I have my draft view, I'll once again recreate it in a top-down three-quarter view. Once again, drawing all your props at various angles really makes it feel disheveled, and know that everything is knocked around. I went for a slightly rounder, less tree-like design for the organic structure breaking through the floor. This is the type of thing that iteration really helps you with, because you can keep refining your direction as you continue. Having this door in the back helps indicate a potential path that the player can take. You want to try to spark curiosity and inspire a player to keep searching throughout the entirety of this location. Because after all, there's no sense in designing the whole thing if the player's not going to spend the time to actually enjoy it and take it in. Elements like the collapsed stairs and overturned tables are a really nice way to set your player in a particular direction while fitting into the narrative. We'll go into it later, but lighting can also play a role in directing the player. If, for example, a light was coming from behind that far door, a player would be motivated to go investigate further. And now once again blocking in the values underneath to separate out that silhouette. I add in some lighting information just to demonstrate the specularity on the structure and to emphasize the form. So now that we have our sets designed, we can figure out where we're going to place our cameras for our cinematic shots. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the mechanics of camera movements. So when the camera is facing forward, the horizon line is directly at the center of the two-dimensional image that is produced. At this vantage point, we can only see the front faces of each box. Tilting the camera up won't allow us to see the top faces of the box, but it will lower the horizon line on the produced two-dimensional image. And as such, we'll see more of the area above the two forms. If instead we decide to pan the camera upwards as opposed to tilting it, the horizon line won't change on the produced two-dimensional image, but it will change in relation to the forms, and thus we'll be able to see the top face of the front box. If we decide to do both of these actions in conjunction, we get a combination of these two effects. Panning the camera upwards will once again allow us to see the top of the front box, while tilting downwards will raise the horizon line on the two-dimensional image produced. And now here's the whole thing in series so you can get a sense of how this works. So returning back to the sets that we've designed, we can place our camera within them to figure out our cinematic shots. I want to have the camera placed near the entrance and panned down near to the floor. The camera will also be tilted upwards, which will lower the horizon line on the two-dimensional image. This type of shot is typical of video games and concept art in general because it's very dramatic and has a nice cinematic quality to it. These grid lines will help me figure out what's captured in the line of sight of the camera. Alright, so now let's try to implement a few different lighting scenarios from the point of view of our camera. I'm going to do a few smaller thumbnails first, before committing to a larger scale drawing. These line drawings are more focused on the placement of the props than their illustrative quality. And since we're going to do a couple of different lighting scenarios with the same line drawing, I avoid putting in too much lighting information in the initial sketch. Then once I finish the sketch, I copy and paste it a few times. Once again, I'm going to be adding in my values on a layer underneath. The most important consideration while doing this is the source of the light and their direction. In this first example, the primary light source is the window on the right, which is creating these left-oriented cast shadows. In the center thumbnail, the light source is going to be emanating from the center of the room, and the light will dissipate exponentially from the light source, as is typically true of any local light. Since the light is coming from the bottom of the room, most of the planes that are facing downward will be lit. In this third example, a strong direct light will be coming from the hole in the ceiling, and a secondary lighting source from the lit lamp in the background, which will also dissipate exponentially. Notice the difference in the quality of the two lights. The first is a directional light, much like a spotlight, which creates very hard shadows. And the second is a more diffuse light, which creates softer edged shadows. Now with my 3 thumbnails done, I create a larger, more detailed sketch. Again, keeping in mind everything we've discussed so far, I start with a very light line weight, and some perspective lines to figure out the placement of my details. It's important while doing this to not let your perspective lines overpower your intuition. If you follow those lines to a T and don't rotate any of your props, it'll lead to a very stale image. So it's important that you understand the principles of rotating forms before doing this. Again, minor details like the tilting of the portraits on the wall and the drawers on the dressers being opened really give the sense that some destructive force has come through here. Again, I add in some heavier line weight on some foreground details and overlapping forms, as well as the organic structure in the back, which is the focal point of the piece. Cracks in the plaster and the exposed wood really show that the building has been weathered. I know that having all these props rotated at various angles can be a bit cumbersome, so if you're having trouble with that, be sure to check out my perspective series first, before jumping into a very complex scene like this one. Now again, once the sketch is fleshed out, I add in a layer underneath to indicate my values. I decided to go with the first lighting scenario, so our main light sources are going to be from the right window and the window in the back. Since this lighting scenario takes place in the early evening, the ambient light is much brighter than the other two examples. And again, since our primary light source is on the right, our strongest cast shadows will be oriented to the left. These foreground elements are receiving the least amount of light, so they're pretty much entirely in shadow. Since the upper part of the organic structure is above the window and thus the light source, the upper half of it will be underlit, with its bottom-facing planes in highlight. Once again, I place in the silhouette of my character, and I change my mind about where I want to position him. And that's pretty much all for this week, guys. Thanks for tuning in. In case you didn't know, I'm writing a book. It's going to be about 150 pages and cover.
Thanks, Guy. Matthew has a hand. His phone is glitching. Okay, cool. Anyways, how cool is that, eh? That's a really cool environment. Feels like, damn it, what's it called? Last of Us. Last of Us vibes. Yeah, I think that would be such a cool scene, though, to actually create in 3D, I mean, in VR, in 360. And if you could do like lighting, moving around the scene like that, changing the different time of day, and having different different ambience as well, playing throughout the different times of the day, that would be a really cool experience. You like the second light? Yeah, I like the second lighting as well. It's very moody, a bit more intense. That one, the third one, is actually very cool in terms of guiding gameplay, because that could be a very good lead to like show you the solution to getting out of the room, basically. And the first one's just a nice all-around lighting.
This week.
Come on, there we go. All right, so moving on from world building. Let's talk about environmental design a little bit. So environmental design is about creating physical settings, both natural and man-made, that support and enrich your narrative, guiding your audience's emotional journey. Now, the term narrative in this sense is not necessarily your explicit narrative. It's not like dialogue and what happens, the events or anything. It could be the implicit narrative as well. So by your world's construction, the environmental storytelling aspect of it as well. Scratches on the floor hint at a narrative. Yeah. So motion design utilizes environmental design to craft compelling scenes or settings that help communicate the narrative. And the environment thus becomes a critical storytelling point element, as seen in like Disney's Paper Man, where the city environment and the office interiors play key roles. So if it's motion design versus 3D animation versus game design, they all utilize the same kinds of, or they can interpret and use the same approaches. Sorry, I'm hearing pings. And 3D animation demands intricate environmental design to create immersive and believable settings for narrative. So this can be seen in like How to Train Your Dragon, where the village of Berk and its unique architecture and landscape serves as an integral part of the story as well. And in game design, environmental design incorporates both aesthetics and gameplay mechanics, so slightly different focus, serving not just as a backdrop, but as a functional space for player interaction as well, like how I was describing with the light kind of showing the direction for the player to move in that previous scene. So like in Legend of Zelda, where the comprehensive world design and diverse ecosystems and landmarks enhance gameplay and immersion, like what I was saying earlier. So here, let's look at How to Train Your Dragon, the island of Berk. Like, just look at its construction. Notice anything interesting? Just shout out. Like, what makes this island very unique and interesting to look at? What aspects of it hint at a world behind it? Very tilted, massive spire. Yeah, I think the tiltedness or the angled lines create drama, right? And kind of it looks like the village is almost sliding off the end there into the water. Distinct silhouettes. Yeah, I mean, even as even though the buildings themselves are very tiny, they do have quite distinct silhouettes there, and it's quite easy then to distinguish between the different buildings. Like the bones and like the thin lines. There's like wood being used. I think this might be like whalebone or something over here. They've got a windmill over there. Very small, few people, isolated. Yeah. Yeah, even the connection over here to what seems or what could be the mainland is a very precarious looking bridge there. Unique man-made structures. Yeah, so I mean, it's a very unique world. It's a very isolated world as well. So you can guess that the story that's going to unfold is obviously a very unique story, very specific to this little village of people as well. Like at the ground and rocks look layered. Yeah, that's a nice stylistic choice.
The architecture also sort of implies the time that this is taking place and the technology that the people have. So it sort of sets it in the past, even though it's kind of fantasy. I don't know if I mean, except for the dragon in the air, we wouldn't have necessarily guessed that this was entirely fantasy necessarily. It could have just been kind of like a far northern sort of Viking village of sorts.
Yeah, Amish Vikings.
Those modern day Amish Vikings, you know.
Yeah, they don't even have ships here, actually.
They got dragons.
Yeah, they don't need ships. Cool, and then we've got Paperman over here. So the line work actually is a very cool aspect of the way they presented this. Like to make it feel more like paper. You can see the cutout, like the lines aren't perfectly on the edge there. But then you've got this very stylized character, and then you've got a more detailed world around it. So the reflective windows and the office space, the slacks hint at a time period as well. The rotary phones, there are rotary phones on the table and stuff. So I don't know, what would this be? 80s? No, maybe before that. Maybe 80s, rotary phones. And then here we've got Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. I think you're thinking 1920s just because the black and white, maybe. Because, yeah, anything 1920s immediately goes like that, black and white. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, they must have had rotary phones in the 20s. Not sure. Can't remember that. Anyways, so yeah, Breath of the Wild here. It's a nice, bright world full of possibility. You can see how there's these like ancient creatures or ancient, I don't know what they're called. They're sort of like robots, but they're made of stone. They've got some kind of technology built into them, but they've got moss over them, indicating that they've been there for a long time. The rock and the walls are all degraded as well. So it's like a sort of a post-apocalyptic world, but a nice one. not too menacing, except for the dude and his laser beam here. What does this image imply? What do you think you get from this? Like what of the world? What kind of culture, history, what construction of the world is hinted at in the elements in this image? A world in ruin. Yeah, last of your kind of thing. Old. Nomadic. Yeah. That's a good one. Wild and untamed. Yeah, a world reclaimed by nature. Lost to time. That's a nice one. Cool, and this is the last video. This is a very cool one as well.
What you're looking at right now is a demonstration I've done for Matthew Zickery and John Park's Foundation Patreon. Aside from all the really cool things that have happened in the past few months, it's been really cool to contribute to something that was so integral to my journey as an artist. If you're unaware of the group, they put out monthly videos covering drawing, design, and digital art. My installment's a little bit over an hour, and it covers creating and modifying primitive forms, and using them to generate scenes like the one you're watching me create. It's the first non-livestream video that I've done in real time, so if you're interested in that type of video, be sure to head to patreon.com/foundation or the associated Gumroad. So I initially had a plan and script for this video until I played this game. In addition to having great mechanics, being super whimsical, and just a fun game overall, I absolutely love the design work that Paul Richards does. And he never tries to deceive the viewer with overly polished pieces. They stand out just on good design alone. Now I'm no designer, but I thought maybe I could learn a thing or two by breaking down some of the aspects of this game. The two things that stand out to me the most is how prominent the primitive geometry is, and the consistency of the shape language. As far as shape language goes, this game is littered with concentric circles. I mean, take a look at this prop I'm dissecting right now. It's a cylinder standing on a circular base, with portions of cylinders for the stairs, and a circle directly on top. The buttresses on the side that are acting as a structural support and adding balance also have circles cut away from them. The main point of contrast comes from the extruded crosshair shape, but even that curves down in a circular fashion. The designs are rich and vibrant, all while remaining elegantly simple, which is something I need to implement a bit more in my own design work. The design feels structural and balanced, in large part due to those architectural forms at the base, but also from the fact that it gets wider towards the ground. The design is symmetrical from side to side, which makes it feel architectural and man-made, but the asymmetry from top to bottom prevents it from feeling stale or lifeless. As I mentioned, this game is completely littered with circles. If you think about what this door really is, it's just an extruded disc. Yes, there are some rectangular elements in there, but even those are subject to being rounded and having circular elements cut into them. Much like I try to emphasize with our line drawings, decisiveness is integral to creating good designs. That's not to say that you shouldn't explore and try things out. It's just to say that at some point during the design process, the Hob team decided on circles and simplistic geometry, and they went to town with it. The result is an environment that feels consistent and age-old like that of a Mayan temple. Even the plant life is subject to this consistency. These spiky plants form circular ringlets that wrap around one another. And then there's these stubby cacti which are squashed to near sphericality. These trees have circular tufts of leaves, rounded roots, and oh yeah, there's this giant circle in the center where everything branches off of. This immersive and consistent design, combined with Hob's fluid mechanics, makes the player want to explore this environment. The world building in this game inspired me to get back to what it is I really want to do, which is design sci-fi environments. Now, I'm not the best at this, but I tried to keep in mind what I'd learned from doing the previous analysis, as well as some studies of mechanical subjects. So here I'm just exploring some shapes and panel elements that might be included in my designs. As you can see, I started by figuring out the primary silhouette shape. I then extrude and bevel this shape much like a 3D modeler might do. One of the things that I'm trying to keep in mind as I'm doing this is a division between primary, secondary, and tertiary shapes, or in other words, the large, medium, and small shapes. Our primary silhouette is broken up by smaller secondary shapes, which I do using cut lines and mechanical joints. Breaking these shapes up asymmetrically will yield the most dynamic result. Elements like the 90 and 45 degree angles in the cut lines impart a manufactured quality to the design. I'm repeating the same steps on the second example, starting with the primary shape, extruding it, and then beveling it. Inspired by the previous studies, I tried to impart a circularity to everything. Most of my 90-degree angles are rounded, and the edges on my secondary shapes are rounded as well. I'm trying my best to repeat motifs where I can, hence why I changed that previously rectangular shape to a slanted 45-degree angle shape. It's my hope that these design choices impart a sense of theme and motif. For me, with sci-fi design in particular, it's always a battle of including enough detail to appear mechanical, without oversaturating with detail and taking away from the simpler shapes. You only get better with more practice, so iteration and repetition are probably the best ways to improve your designs. Here I'm repeating the circular elements within the smaller details. Learning to design is an inherently arduous endeavor. It'll rely heavily on your ability to sketch with competence, not only so you can express the design with visual language, but also so you can analyze your reference material. Good design necessitates a fair amount of research, and if you're at a point where you're struggling simply to replicate what you're seeing, then coming up with original designs might seem like an insurmountable task. Don't underestimate the importance of observational sketching, because it's the elements in the world around us that are going to shape our design sensibilities and the decisions we make. Rushing into the design process, either because of a lack of fundamentals or a lack of proper research, can feel like bashing your head against the wall. It's a lot like trying to write a script without understanding language. You start with vocabulary and grammar, and eventually develop an understanding of the nuances, like foreshadowing, irony, and narrative structure. Now that I've generated some shape ideas, I'll try to do a more macroscopic view of a platform. The way I'm doing this process is different than the previous one where I started with a line drawing. In this case, I'm starting with the shape of the overall silhouette, and you've probably seen a lot of designers online doing this. It's a really common method of generating ideas. From here, I start doing a line drawing over the silhouette, keeping in mind everything that we've discussed so far, trying to break things down into small, medium, and large shapes, trying to keep the division of these shapes asymmetric, and I'm attempting to provide consistency in my shape language, which I can do using repeated shapes and motifs. One of the main benefits for working digitally is that it really allows you to explore your designs. The ability to make unique shapes with modifications and the shape tool, or the ease with which you can incorporate elements of previous designs into subsequent ones, make the computer one of the best tools for creating worlds. But it can easily be a double-edged sword if you allow these options to paralyze you. I sometimes find that the infinity of options can harbor indecisive habits. So sometimes it's best to just merge all those layers together and just work directly. and a small figure for scaling. I've already fleshed out a decent bit of more mechanical details, so I'm just copying those over. Now whether or not these designs are successful, I'll leave up to you, but I really want to keep pushing these sci-fi endeavors. There's countless reasons we can come up with to excuse not tackling a weakness. But more often than not, when you face your fears head on, you end up growing the most, both as an artist and as a person. And that's one of the benefits of being open with your work and sharing it with peers that will give you honest critiques. Prior to starting this channel, I kept my work bottled up for about a year and a half, sharing it only with a few close friends. I did get better over this time period, but I only started to have more marked improvements when I started sharing my work and setting concrete goals. Last year, it was post an observational sketch to my Instagram account 4 days a week, which I kept up for about 6 months. Setting a concrete goal makes the job tangible. It means if you haven't accomplished the task in the given period of time, then you haven't done your job. Imagine the feeling you'd have if you worked at a store and then, unannounced, you decided not to show up for your workday. That same feeling is what pushes people to succeed in creative endeavors. You can't sit around waiting for inspiration to come. You have to make it. And that's it for me this week, guys. A huge thank you to everybody who helped me reach the funding goal for the book. It's really
I don't know about you guys, but I find that quite impressive how just going from silhouette to this sci-fi looking thing that you already start thinking about all the possibilities of where this could exist, of the world that it could exist in, why you would have these claws maybe. Like it's just an interesting process just listening to why he's decided on doing things the way he's done them. And it all comes back to trying to figure out what is the world that this exists in, establishing what the rules are for those worlds, and creating consistency in each aspect of that. So like even where he said over here that he erased a certain area because it didn't quite work with the rules of what he was creating. So he reworked it to try and make it a bit better. And the other thing was start with primitive shapes, large, medium, and small types of shapes, and then maybe go for a silhouette type approach to begin with. So these are all tools that you can use to try and come up with these immersive environments as well.
what you're looking at right now is a demonstration.
Oh yeah, that could be cool, having the claws connect them. Okay, then when it comes to set dressing, so we've learned a few things now from that video, but set dressing involves the addition of visual and contextual details to an environment. So these elements imbue life and realism into a scene, enhancing the narrative and user immersion. So in world building, set dressing helps establish context, setting, and culture. So for instance, a futuristic city would be dressed with advanced technology or high-tech screens, while an old village would have rustic elements and worn-out textures. So set dressing can guide visual narrative, influencing how a user or viewer perceives the world. In dystopian settings, landscapes filled with debris and decay can emphasize desolation and downfall. Think of WALL-E, for instance. In interactive environments, set dressing can provide clues or facilitate exploration, enhancing the user's engagement and connection to the world. Like this scene over here. Not particularly pretty, but it tells a story. Can anyone guess what the story is here? An unfortunate incident with the desk fan, it seems. Yeah. The level design is actually in Fallout 3, actually all the Fallouts. It's now become a bit of a running gag about placing skeletons in certain situations to sort of tell a story. Find them all over the world. Yeah, indeed. Okay, so props. So props are essential functional items within a world, and they can range from mundane everyday objects to unique world-specific items. Props often serve a narrative or functional purpose, and a character's personal item can give insight into their personality or history, and a key could unlock a new area in a game. So in animation games, props can directly impact character interactions or gameplay mechanics. For instance, the strategic placement of weapons or power-ups can change the dynamics of a game level completely. So props are something to think about. Then layout. So layout is the intentional arrangement of elements or props within a scene or environment, and it shapes how a user or viewer navigates the world that they focus on and what they focus on. So good layout design guides the user or viewer's attention, subtly directing them towards important elements or areas. In games, layout can affect gameplay strategies and progression. Like a labyrinth design might encourage exploration, whilst a linear path guides users along a set narrative. And in animation or motion design, the layout can influence the narrative pacing and the viewer's emotional journey, creating a sense of tension, tranquility, or anything in between that. So here we have another scene. With each of these scenes, imagine that you're standing sort of in the middle of it and actually being able to look around. Can you envision the sounds that you would be hearing, the slight motion of the wind blowing through the trees there? Think about why this world exists the way it is. It looks like it was a sort of a futuristic human civilization that something happened to. A lot of decay. There's a lot of metal and squareness to everything. So it might not be a very design-oriented society. They don't really care about aesthetics all that much, and it was more functionality. The buildings are raised off the ground as well, which might suggest some kind of there must be some kind of reason for why they were raised off of the ground like that. Maybe it was just because of space, and there was more space in the air, so that the ground had more space. So it's massive populations. What else? Any ideas, thoughts on this scene? Vibe, mood. What could have existed here?
It could perhaps. It also kind of shows technology being taken over by nature. Like there was a golden age of whatever lived there, but that is long since passed, and now it's only like a fraction of what they used to be.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of warm colors.
Lockdown.
Doesn't feel very like dark or dreary.
Yeah, it's more like the dust has settled and everything has taken place already. This is after civilization, after whatever happened. Yeah, this is what happened with lockdown. Okay, here's the next scene. Yeah, it does have actually Stray vibes. Yeah. Okay, thoughts on this world? How does this world exist? Time period, culture?
Someone is looking to die fast.
Maybe it's his pet, you don't know. What can you take away from this image that would suggest where this is? How does this world work? Big no broke, yeah. Japanese vibes, yeah. Asian vibes for sure. The boat, the fruit in the boat as well could look like jackfruit. The hat. The sort of bamboo-ish trees coming out of the water. This could be a flooded world, you know, where the seas have all risen and everything is basically underwater. Snake is like the guardian of the land, yeah? It's a cool thought. Mythological figure. Yeah, that's cool. Mystical. Definitely mystical, especially with the little bits of glowiness over here coming from those flowers. I think mystical as well because the flowers are so perfect. Like everything seems so serene. I mean, other than the giant snake. Hidden world, like in Abzu. Yeah, definitely a hidden world. Yeah. I'm definitely sensing like spirit guardian vibes over here on a journey somewhere here. Magic in the air. Yeah, and I imagine actually being able to sit in that boat as your 360 experience and being able to look around, see the reflections on the water, see these little glowy things floating around, the snake sort of having like a low rumble tone and just the water sort of moving, the scales overlapping. Like, can you sense it? Can you see that, envision what that might feel like? It's definitely quite an immersive atmosphere. And then this one. Or can you ascertain from this image? They found me.
It almost looks like a fire.
It's like golden hour maybe. So like very golden sunlight on the grass here. And then the darkness of the woods as the sun is setting. Crusades, Dark Souls. Yeah. Those are big swords. Spider-Verse. The vibrant colors, yeah. It's more artistic. I'd be very keen to see this in like a 360 environment. Skyrim with a ton of mods. Just gonna see Thomas the Tank Engine popping out of the shadows there just now. Old Gold reminds me of that one Love, Death and Robots episode. Yeah. Yeah, Love, Death and Robots is amazing. And now for something completely different. Now we got cutesy, happy, relaxing vibes, but it might turn violent. You never know. These things can. Yeah, those two ladybugs are enjoying their time. So miniature land, fantasy. I mean, there's a dude that looks like a wizard. And a happy looking snail. Kind of a cheerful, happy-go-lucky sort of world, it seems. The snail is traumatized. Yeah, totally. Oh, and then this one. I really like this one. This one's awesome. Once again, like imagine being able to sit on that boat and look around you and see this dragon creature under the water there. Hear the water sort of rippling by, see the little fishies swimming. Yeah, this is like a futuristic civilization that's sort of forbid any sort of technology, or maybe they have some sort of ancient power that helps them or something. A flooded world, yeah. The hidden Colossus. But you can sort of picture the village life, right? Like maybe there's a little bakery somewhere over here, and this little dude's off to go and take these two to school. I don't know. Just casual, peaceful life. Cool. So in conclusion, for world building, you want to maintain consistency, ensure that every aspect of your world, from culture to geography, aligns with the rules of your world and contributes to a cohesive experience. You want to consider the functionality of environments, so don't just focus on aesthetics. Your environments should serve a purpose, whether it's to enhance the narrative, guide player in actions in a game, or evoke specific emotions in an audience. And environments enhance narrative or experience. So every detail in your world should serve to heighten the audience's immersion, bolster the narrative, and enrich the gameplay if it's a game. So these are not just techniques, these are tools to stimulate imagination, evoke emotions, and craft truly unforgettable experiences. All right. And then in terms of if you wanted to go this route, doing 360 footage, so actually capturing footage and overlaying 3D content or 2D content, but digital content on existing or real footage. So in film and animation, visual development is the early stage of production, where all the different ways to translate a story idea into visuals are being explored. Then you go on to research. So research into areas such as architecture, historical environment, landscape, costume, and props start simultaneously. And production designers then are responsible for selecting the location, set pieces, props, costumes, and dressing the set according to the research and visual development. And once you've got all that real world stuff in place, then you can start filming that 360 footage. So it complicates the production process though, because you have to capture all angles at once, and nothing is omitted from the view, and production designers have to work within the confines of the medium. So no additional stage lights, no booms or coffee cups left by the crew can be tolerated. And something like the, what's the name of it now? What's the stage that they're using? Like the immersive stage that they did for Mandalorian that they're using for everything. Can't recall what's the name.
And it's just virtual production in general, but are
Yeah.
you thinking about a specific location?
No, I'm just talking about the I can't remember what the name of it is now, but basically it's giant 360 screens and the ceiling. But what the benefit is there, they've got cameras all around the room that are tracking that's tracking the virtual camera. So a cameraman still holds this virtual camera, and if they move around, then the virtual world on the screens moves around as well, creating like this, like an actual real environment, or makes it look like it. I don't know, Stefan, was there something else you wanted to
There was another point.
talk about on this?
Wasn't there?
If you Google Mandalorian, you get a little Grogu on screen. That's adorable.
Was that the last point on the slide?
Last one. Static cameras. They could help facilitate the compositing process and allow VFX animators or artists to stitch together multiple takes, like shooting plates while orbiting the footage. Could happen in post.
Yeah. So essentially, the footage that you're shooting from a static or pre-programmed rig will allow you to motion track and mask elements within the world. So you can then start exploring the depth of the footage purely based on the tracking information. But the moment that you start moving your camera around, it becomes infinitely more difficult, because then you have to not only motion track in all directions with perspective changes and things like that. Masking things would become infinitely more difficult to do. So yeah, just considering the job of the production designer when it comes to 360 footage is like it essentially needs to remove the entire crew that it used to be reliant on for lighting, for sound. You used to be able to have a cinematographer on set along with the director. Now everyone needs to kind of like get out of the way because you're shooting in all directions. So the only way to sort of bypass that and still shoot, like still film it as if it was a film, would be to, to have a pre-programmed camera rig or a static camera, because then you can shoot it more than once. So that's the idea with plates. Then the whole crew can move to the other side of the camera, and you could repeat the action again. So you could then essentially mask out half of your frame or a portion of your frame. But it's a lot more work. And then last week, I think when we were looking at examples, I mentioned an app that used to host 360 content. It was called Within. But now looking at it, I think in February this year, it appears that they've closed their services, or they're no longer doing that particular app. But you can still go there, and then they sort of tell you where they're going, and it just sort of also points at the constant evolution of this medium, where people finding new ways of engaging with immersive content. With the increase or the accessibility of headsets nowadays, it sort of doesn't really make sense to strictly focus on mobile applications or mobile VR experiences, and it's becoming sort of more and more generic that you can kind of access it from different devices and have a similar experience. And then trying to find an alternative to that service just led me to this link, which I also think might be worthwhile just copying somewhere for you to reference later, because it has quite an extensive list of different types of video formats, some of the best VR videos on YouTube, apparently. There's some roller coaster ones, and these are things that we can access and sort of experiment with. If you really want the VR experience, obviously a headset would be ideal. But even just watching it on your phone and having it tap into your accelerometer will give you kind of that idea of how you can format or certain tricks of the trade that they use, like maybe having a sort of a passenger or a driver. Like we said, it was characterless and sort of first person, but you could essentially like be on a roller coaster and have the roller coaster sort of kind of act as the guide throughout, or whatever it is. I think I saw some examples where there's like iguanas running with you and weird things. So yeah, there's YouTube 360, there's Vimeo 360, there's the Oculus Store or the Meta Store, some stuff on Steam, there's Facebook 360, and then there's VR, to name a few platforms. But do go and check it out. I think the more of these kind of experiences you experience for yourself, the better you'd be able to formulate an idea around how to potentially tackle a project.
Yeah, this thing's called the Volume. That's what it was.
The Volume.
Yeah, so they have like the stage in the middle here. You can see all the cameras up around the edge there. Then they've got like a crane and a camera, but it's actually virtual, so it just gets tracked by those cameras, and then the perspective in the world here changes to match the camera. So you have this really cool mashup of real and digital, but it looks flawless. Really impressive. And then like the lighting is all HDR because you're being lit by the screen almost.
And that's I think they use Unreal for that mostly.
Yeah.
And there's an app that you can download from the app. I don't know if it's only Apple. Some of these are. And I think it's just because of the way that the Apple hardware has sort of become the de facto standard for AR interactions or experiences.
Jeez, that's cool.
But yeah, so LiveLink VCam is the app that you can download. and it's pretty easy to set up. And then that'll track your virtual camera movements. Then your phone becomes the camera in Unreal. Kind of strange to think about.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, check that. They've got like the stage piece and then the digital piece on the roof there and the background. That's so cool.
I quickly want to ask, are there any types of pitfalls that we need to look out for in terms of what types of scenes usually don't do well? What should we not aim to create? If there even is something like that.
Just what we covered last week, we sort of mentioned moving cameras and dealing with motion sickness. That's always a thing.
So motion sickness.
And because you're completely immersed most of the time, the thing is literally sitting on your face. You don't want to have a lot of flashing lights or bright lights, high contrast. Those sort of things are just maybe things to look out for, or at least get a couple of people with epilepsy to test it for you, and then you can sorry, that's very insensitive.
No, but it makes sense. So don't create anything that would make people sick.
Yeah,
in short.
yeah, or people that are prone to motion sickness. But I mean, you never know. It might be you until you test it. So rather just avoid it in general. Like limit camera movements. If you want to move cameras, have it either be at a constant tempo. I think like with the roller coaster experience, it's kind of like the same movement all the time. But even that might make you seasick. I don't know.
It definitely does. It does for me.
Yeah, it stands to be tested. So on that point, just before the coffee break, I think we looked at the schedule, and we do have the B4 studio, so the animation game studio, and the Atrium available for us at this time. And I think it would be nice for us to all like meet up and actually test these experiences either on the VR headset or the mobile devices with the additional headsets and whatever gear we have on location. So if no one has any objections, I think week 4 makes a good milestone for this. So not next week, but the week after. It's cool. We'll schedule it on Canvas that way as well and send you a reminder. And if you can't, we can also, we'll record it in 360 so you can go. Cool. Alexi?
So by this time, we shouldn't have anything done to actually play test, right?
No, not yet.
Okay, thank goodness. And also, when exactly again, if you mind repeating?
Week 4.
Week 4.
And if we can't attend, you said you would like do a recording, yes?
Yeah, I'll do a 360 recording.
That's pretty cool. Thanks.
And you can navigate it. I'm just historically quite bad with audio, so I'm going to try and figure out how I'm going to match the audio timing, but we'll figure it out by that time. And then there was a little other thing that I didn't have it installed, and I don't know if any of you tried it, and I thought I'd just show you because it's so ridiculously simple. It's the character animation. Wait, it says I'm not allowed.
Not allowed to share.
I'm not allowed to share. No, it's not you, it's me.
Ah.
I had to set permissions. Now I can't share. Okay, I'll show you after the break.
Cool. Okay, go get some coffee, chill a bit. Let's be back in 10 minutes, and then yeah, got an exercise to do.